I'm sorry. I have to put this back.
The trembling words broke out small, yet sharp enough to split the air at the checkout counter. Mega Mart's fluorescent lights blazed bright and indifferent, washing over the long line of people waiting. The scanner's beeps cut like blades across her pride, while behind her the carts rattled and the prying eyes pressed like 1,000 needles. In that moment, the observer was James Caldwell, a private tech billionaire used to a world of luxury and cold numbers. But today, in an ordinary supermarket, he was forced to confront the raw truth of poverty. Underscore, 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 underscore. The ceiling lights hummed in Megamart, a dull, unfeeling drone that seemed to drown Eleanor in confusion. At just 27, she lived as if the whole earth weighed on her narrow shoulders. Her one consolation was Daisy, her 1-year-old, a small miracle, with summer sky blue eyes. Daisy's smile usually chased the shadows away, but today not even that light could pierce the thick fog of misfortune. In the worn-out cart lay only a few basics: a cheap loaf of bread, a small box of oats, a bag of frozen vegetables, 2 jars of baby food, and a large blue can of formula the doctor had insisted Daisy needed. The cheaper kinds knotted the baby's stomach and kept her wailing through the night. Eleanor had sworn to cut everything else, even her own meals, if that's what it took for her child to be okay. The cashier, a young man named Kevin Eyes, unfocused, started to scan each item. Beep, bread. Beep, oats. Beep, frozen vegetables. Each tone snipped away another thread of hope. The number on the little screen jumped higher and heavier. In her coat pocket, Eleanor clutched a cracked leather wallet, an heirloom from her great-grandfather who'd been to war. Inside were only a few crumpled bills and some coins, just enough to limp along until payday. "Is that all?" Kevin asked, flat-voiced. Eleanor nodded, throat tight. When the formula slid past the scanner, the beep sounded louder, more final. $31.42. Eleanor froze. She had counted and recounted before leaving the tiny apartment. She'd held out a thin hope for a surprise discount, a leftover coupon, a miracle. But miracles, it seemed, belonged to other lives, not hers. Shame burned under her skin. Someone behind her shifted. A cart clattered. I'm sorry, I have to put this back." Eleanor's voice was so faint she could hardly hear it herself. Kevin's face didn't change. To him, this was ordinary, a routine apology, fumbling fingers, downcast eyes. Eleanor's hand trembled as she touched the can, cold and heavy as lead. Pain tightened in her chest, stealing her breath. In that plain moment beneath indifferent lights, she felt like the worst mother in the world, failing the child she loved more than life. "This one?" Her voice splintered. "I have to put it back." She didn't dare look up, afraid to meet a pitying gaze. Her awkward fingers rifled through the wallet, while the silent stares behind her drilled into her back like knives. A few yards away, feigning interest in the organic juice shelf, James Caldwell stood still. A black man in his 30s, in a simple gray coat. He looked like any other shopper. In truth, he was a giant of tech, an intensely private billionaire whose photo sometimes appeared in financial papers, though he despised attention. In James's hand was the small hand of his 5-year-old daughter, Sophia, her curls soft and her eyes as serious as his. Sophia was the center of James's universe, the anchor in a life of glitz that felt strangely hollow. They'd come to the store for something that seemed trivial, but would lead to an unexpected turning point. Sophia, with bright eyes and curls like gentle waves, had insisted only one specific organic apple juice could make her happy. And that brand was sold only at Megamart. With a single text, James could have someone deliver a case to the house. But when his daughter looked up, eyes shining, and pleaded, "I want to go with you, Daddy," the powerful man who could move global markets was powerless before that small wish. He agreed at once. Because of that, he witnessed a sight wealth rarely has to face, need naked and unvarnished. He watched Eleanor's hand tremble around the frayed wallet. He saw the flicker of embarrassment on her face as the total rang up. He had read reports, signed checks for million-dollar donations, attended glittering galas. But poverty had always been a number data. This time it stood before him in the eyes of a young mother quietly breaking. When Eleanor pushed the formula aside, a sharp ache struck James's chest. It wasn't pity. It was a deeper compassion and almost instinctive pull. "Daddy!" Sophia tugged his sleeve and whispered, "Why does she look so sad?" James glanced down at his child. How could he explain injustice to someone who had never lacked how to say there are mothers who must choose between their own supper and a baby's milk? He only murmured, "She's just having a hard day, sweetheart." He watched Eleanor lower her head, take up her scant bags, and head for the door. Her small figure was heavy with defeat, like a shadow trying to slip out of the world's gaze. And in that instant, James Caldwell, a man who could buy anything, made a decision no money could purchase. He would not let this woman vanish into the dark. He would not leave her to carry that weight alone. He didn't know exactly why. He only knew this. He had to do something. James bent to Sophia. "Sweetheart, stay here with Mr. Henderson for a moment." "Okay." He nodded to the guard by the entrance quietly, one of his own staff. Sophia trusted him, so she nodded. James went back to the register, lifted the formula Eleanor had left, and added a few more things. A warm rotisserie chicken, a bag of bright red apples, a buttery loaf of bread, and a box of the cookies Sophia loved. He paid cash, took the bags, and stepped into the chilly night. His eyes scanned the floodlit lot. At the far edge, near a quiet bus stop, he found Eleanor curled on a metal bench with a small bag at her feet. Her gaze drifted into empty space. In that wide, impersonal place, she looked even smaller, even more alone. James approached gently, not wanting to startle her. "Excuse me." His voice came out softer than he intended. Eleanor flinched, looking up at the tall, well-dressed man with 2 grocery bags. Her first thought was that he must be the store manager come to scold her. "I think you forgot this," James said kindly, offering the bag with the formula. Eleanor went still. She looked at the can, then up, cheeks burning with shame. I didn't forget," she stammered, quiet but firm. "I couldn't afford it. I know James had sincerity in his eyes, so I bought it for you." Eleanor was stunned. There was no condescension in his gaze, only steady understanding. A feeling rose in her, strange and wary, because no stranger had ever treated her with such gentleness. I can't accept it," she said, shaking her head, pride lifting its final shield. "Please," James urged softly. "It's just a can of formula. Your daughter needs it." He glanced at the small pink bag by her feet. "You have a little one, don't you, Daisy?" she answered, choking up tears, threatening. "That's a beautiful name." James smiled. "I have a daughter too. Sophia, she's 5. He offered the bag again. "Please take it, as a gift from one parent to another." Eleanor hesitated. Pride resisted, but love for Daisy wouldn't yield. The baby needed that formula. In truth, there was only one choice. Her daughter was everything. Eyes blurring, Eleanor reached out, hands trembling, and took the bag. "Thank you," she whispered, voice tight with an emotion too big to name. "No need," James said with a small smile. "But it's cold, and the bus won't be here for a while." "Let me drive you home. My car's right there." He pointed to a sleek gray car, luxurious yet intentionally understated. The driver stood nearby, discreet and still. Eleanor was overwhelmed. The formula alone had left her reeling now. A ride in a car worth a year of wages. "Oh, I can't," she said, voice quavering. "The bus is coming." James shook his head, gentle yet firm. "It's really no trouble. It's getting dark. Let me help." He reached for her other bag. His fingers brushed hers only a moment, but warmth ran up her arm. For the first time, she looked straight at him beneath the refined coat and calm bearing. She noticed the faint traces of weariness around kind eyes. Something deep and unhidden sadness lingered there. James wasn't just a rich man bestowing favors. He was human with wounds of his own. As if in a dream, Eleanor let him guide her to the car. The driver opened the rear door. Inside was another world, warm, quiet. the faint scent of leather and something subtle and elegant. The smell of comfort pleasant, yet making Eleanor feel out of place. James lifted Sophia into her booster. The child tilted her head at Eleanor, wide-eyed and curious. "Sophia, this is Miss Vance," James said. "She and her little girl are riding home with us." "Hi," Sophia peeped. "Hello, Sophia." Eleanor smiled, her first real smile of the night. "It's so nice to meet you." The ride was mostly silent, but not awkward. James asked for the address. Eleanor recited it, a flush rising as she imagined the building he would see. James didn't wince. He simply told the driver where to go and then played I Spy with Sophia in a voice gentle as music. Eleanor watched. She saw a father's love clear, complete, so beautiful it made her chest ache. Yet in James's eyes she still recognized that quiet shadow of loneliness she knew too well. When the car stopped at a cracked step, 3-story brick building, James insisted on carrying her bags. "You've done too much already." Eleanor protested softly. "I know you can handle it," he answered with a warm smile. "But let me help." The softness in his voice held a certain authority. Eleanor couldn't refuse. They walked the narrow, dim hallway, yellow bulbs flickering the old carpet stained with long-held smells. Each step widened the gulf between his world and hers. At the tiny apartment at the end, she fumbled for her key, her stomach tight thinking of the peeling paint and worn doormat. The door swung open. A happy babble rang out. Daisy pushed herself up in the crib, face glowing. Mama Eleanor scooped her up, burying her face in the downy hair. Shame and humiliation melted away. This was her true world, Daisy, arms around her life itself. She looked up. James stood on the threshold, expression unreadable. "This is Daisy," she whispered, full of feeling. James smiled, and it lit his face with something genuine. "She's perfect." His eyes swept the small room, few belongings, yet tidy and clean. A couple of frames on a low shelf beside a stack of library books. A home, poor in things, rich in love. Right then, in that cramped space, James Caldwell, a man who had stood on the summit of wealth, felt something rare, true connection. This wasn't a random act of kindness. Deep inside, he knew this was the beginning of something else. He handed Eleanor the groceries. "It's very nice to meet you, Miss Eleanor." "Thank you. You have no idea what this means to me." "I think I do," James said, meeting her eyes. For a brief moment, a quiet understanding passed between them, deeper than words. It felt like recognition, an invisible bridge joining two worlds that should never have met. James left, descending the dim stairwell into the chilly night. As the car pulled away from the curb, a strange feeling bloomed in his chest. Hope, something he thought he'd forgotten. He didn't yet know that the brief encounter at the supermarket, sparked by a simple can of formula, was the start of a story that would change his life and Eleanor's. In the days that followed, the gray atmosphere that seemed to cling to Eleanor began to thin. The fog of despair, her constant companion, made room for a thin ray of light, not because of the material help alone, but because for the first time in months, she felt seen. In a world that had rendered her invisible, a stranger had looked at her as a real person, a mother worthy of understanding. That night after Daisy fell asleep, Eleanor sat in the small, quiet room. The can of formula on the counter stood as a silent witness to a strange evening. She made tea and cupped its warmth, the memory replaying over and over. His name was James. His daughter was Sophia. That was all she knew. Surely they would never meet again. He was a ship slipping through the night, a flash of light on a dark sea. But what he'd done didn't just help Daisy. It rekindled an ember in Eleanor she thought had long gone cold, a fragile hope enough to set her heart beating with purpose again. For months, her life had been a harsh loop, wake-ready. Daisy drop her off grind through an 8-hour diner shift, pick her up home-cooked clean, collapse into a broken sleep. Repeat. No space for dreams. Paycheck barely covered rent and a little food. Now a new thought took root, thin, tentative, but real. She deserved more. Daisy deserved more. On the shelf, the old photo of her great-grandfather, Sergeant Michael Vance, still shone with steady eyes. He had fought for a country that promised opportunity. Eleanor had grown up on stories of his courage. She wondered if he could see her now exhausted and just getting by, what would he think? The next morning she woke with a different resolve. She moved quickly in the kitchen lighter somehow. During Daisy's nap, instead of numbing herself with the TV, she sat at the old table with a pen and blank paper. She listed her skills, hard-working, punctual, good with people. Before Daisy, she'd been a receptionist at a small law office, organized, precise. But the pay had never covered childcare, and she'd had to quit. She circled job postings in an old newspaper. On her phone, catching a shaky cafe Wi-Fi signal, she searched for more. Most required degrees or experience she didn't have. The old discouragement swelled, but this time she pushed it aside. She wouldn't quit. Not today. Then one posting caught her eye. Administrative Assistant Veterans Community Center. Better pay than the diner stable hours. More than that, it had meaning something her great-grandfather would be proud of. Eleanor took a breath and began her first resume in over 2 years. Across town, in a modern house facing the skyline, James Caldwell couldn't forget that night at Megamart either. His life was an endless chessboard of board meetings, portfolios, billion-dollar deals, a world of privilege and deep solitude. 3 years earlier, his wife Isabella had died, leaving a void no success or fortune could fill. Sophia kept him going, but the daily care fell mostly to nannies and staff. He was a father, yes, but too often he felt like a CEO running a household, not a present parent. Eleanor's image stayed with him, the quiet pride in her eyes, even as she made an impossible choice. The palpable love that filled the tiny, orderly apartment. In that 10-minute stretch in her dim hallway, James felt more human than he had in 3 years of cold conference rooms and hollow charity galas. The next day, her image wouldn't let him go. During a global call, he stared out the glass and wondered if she'd found a job. Reviewing financial projections, he saw Daisy's bright face, then Sophia's shy smile. A strange urge rose he needed to know if they were okay. That was new. He usually solved problems with logic and money. He signed checks. He funded initiatives. But he had never let himself get this close to a stranger's life. Only Eleanor didn't feel like a stranger. For a moment, he had seen her soul, an ordinary life, waging a quiet fight powered by fierce love. And it knocked on the emptiness inside him. He wanted to help, but carefully. He'd seen the pride in her eyes. Handouts would be an insult. He needed a way to lift her up, not weigh her down with gratitude. So he did something rare. He turned his vast resources towards something personal. He called David, head of security, a former FBI agent he trusted absolutely, and asked for a discreet check. Only the basics, James said. I just want to know they're safe. The next day, David laid a thin folder on the glass desk. James opened it and felt that strange ache again. Address, work history, clean record. Ordinary until he read the family section. Eleanor was the great-granddaughter of Sergeant Michael Vance. James stared. He knew that name. His grandfather, Corporal Thomas Caldwell, had served in the same unit. He had told stories of Michael Vance with reverence, the man who single-handedly saved their platoon in a brutal battle. History books barely mentioned. Thomas had been one of the lives saved that day. James leaned back, mind-spinning. This couldn't be coincidence. It was a thread pulled taut across 70 years, binding past to present the Caldwells to the Vances. His grandfather had carried a debt of gratitude to his grave. Now James had stumbled into the path of the hero's great-granddaughter, a young mother struggling at a checkout lane. Compassion hardened into resolve. This was no longer random kindness. This was legacy. Honor. A family debt he could finally repay. But how a check would cheapen it to charity? He needed to offer opportunity, not obligation. He brooded all day. He canceled meetings, ignored urgent emails. On the desk sat a photo of him and Sophia at the park, both laughing. He thought about the image he wanted to etch in his daughter's mind, not a hollow billionaire on a magazine cover, but a principled father who valued human connection. By sunset shadows long across his office, he had a plan. Unusual, risky, but right. He called David back. "I need you to arrange a meeting." A week later, Eleanor's phone rang. The Veterans Community Center, where she'd applied, invited her to interview. Her heart hammered, hope flared. 2 days on, she prepared carefully, pressed her one decent blouse, memorized every line of her resume, asked the elderly neighbor to watch Daisy. The center surprised her. Walls hung with local veterans' photos, warm and welcoming. She sat with Miss Gable, the director, a kind woman with a gentle smile. The interview went better than she dared hope. She spoke of her great-grandfather, Sergeant Michael Vance, with a rising pride of her respect for the military and her honest wish to serve an organization doing noble work. At the end, Miss Gable smiled. "You're an impressive woman, Eleanor. I can feel your passion." Then her face softened with a hint of regret. "But the administrative position was just filled. I'm truly sorry." Eleanor's heart dropped. She'd nearly touched a chance only to lose it. She steadied herself and nodded. "I understand. Thank you for your time." She stood the familiar weight of defeat settling again. "Wait," Miss Gable said, lifting a hand. "There's another opportunity. It's a bit unusual." She slid a paper across the desk. Bold letters at the top made Eleanor blink. "Vance Legacy Grant." This program, Miss Gable explained, was just established by a major benefactor. It's specifically for direct descendants of local heroes. It covers tuition, job training, and a monthly stipend to help families get stable. And you would be the first recipient. The donor apparently learned of your application and your connection to Sergeant Vance. He was adamant. Eleanor was speechless. A grant bearing her own family name. Like a dream. "Who is the benefactor?" she finally asked. "He prefers to remain anonymous," Ms. Gable said with a small smile. "He believes in honoring heroes and helping their families. This is yours if you want it." Eleanor stared at the page, eyes brimming. She thought of her great-grandfather, of the man at the supermarket, of that sliver of hope. This wasn't alms. It was a chance. It was legacy. A tear slid down her cheek, but her voice was steadier than ever. "Yes, I want it." Leaving the center in the glow of late-day sun, Eleanor felt a strange peace. She didn't know the man who'd bought a can of formula had also opened her future. But for the first time in a long time, the road ahead didn't feel dark. It shone with possibility, and she was ready to walk it. The Vance Legacy Grant was more than money. It was a life raft in a storm solid ground after years of treading water. First, Eleanor moved. She found a small 2-bedroom in a quiet, child-friendly neighborhood. Not fancy, but safe. A patch of grass out back for Daisy to play. Sun-filled windows. For the first time since Daisy's birth, Eleanor could breathe deeply without choking on worry. She built a strict schedule. Daytime was all about Daisy the park. The library, story-time towers of colored blocks on the floor. Daisy bloomed in the sunlight, babbled to first words, wobbly steps to tiny, confident runs. At night, once Daisy slept, another Eleanor woke. She brewed strong coffee, sat at a second-hand table, and opened her battered laptop. With tuition covered, she enrolled in an online business administration program at the community college. The coursework was tough. Her tired mind often throbbed. But each spreadsheet and chapter gave her a clear aim. She wasn't just surviving. She was building. She imagined the anonymous donor, perhaps a kind elderly veteran, leaving a meaningful legacy. She wrote a heartfelt thank you and gave it to Miss Gable to pass along. She wanted him to know the gift wasn't going to waste. She would honor her great-grandfather by walking forward with purpose. She never guessed the benefactor wasn't some distant figure, but the man with the gentle eyes at Megamart. The one who had placed a can of formula in her hands when she was about to break. The memory of that can Eleanor kept like a small separate jewel in her heart. She never suspected it tied directly to her new reality. 3 months after the grant began, Miss Gable called. "Dear Eleanor," she said warmly, "next week we're hosting a small event to officially launch the Vance Legacy Grant and thank our donors. You're the first recipient. It would mean so much if you came and shared a few words, just a couple of minutes about how the program has changed life for you and Daisy." Eleanor's stomach knotted. Public speaking was her worst nightmare. "Oh, Miss Gable, I'm not sure." "I'm no good at that. Just speak from the heart," Miss Gable encouraged. "You're the living reason this program exists, and our largest benefactor will attend. He's very private, but he'll be there. I think it would move him to hear your story." At the word benefactor, Eleanor trembled. This might be her one chance to thank the person who had changed everything. Scared as she was, she knew she had to go. "Yes, I'll be there," she said, drawing a deep breath. The week before the event passed in a tangle of nerves. She wrote and rewrote her remarks, nothing ever feeling right. She worried about what to wear, settled on a simple navy dress from the clearance rack, the first new thing she'd bought for herself in years. That evening, she left Daisy with the trusted neighbor and drove her old car to the community center. The hall was simple white tablecloths, small vases of flowers, familiar faces of veterans and families. Eleanor gripped her purse palms, damp, feeling small among the crowd. Then she saw him, James, across the room speaking with a city councilman. The dark suit fit perfectly, but his thoughtful eyes and pensive face were exactly as they'd been that night. Eleanor's heart stumbled shock and a fragile quiver. Sensing her gaze, James turned. Their eyes met. Recognition flickered, then a slow, gentle smile. For a moment, the room fell away. He excused himself and walked toward her. With every step, pieces clicked into place. Anonymous benefactor, rare appearance, a program bearing her family name, forming a single picture. "Eleanor," he said, voice warm and familiar. "James," she breathed. "I'm so glad to see you, but what are you doing here?" He smiled. "I could ask you the same, but I think I know the answer." Just then, Miss Gable arrived, delighted. "Ah, so you two have met Eleanor. This is Mr. James Caldwell, the benefactor I mentioned, the one we have to thank for the Vance Legacy grant." The world tilted. Eleanor went still. Her lips parted without sound. It was him. The man who had bought the formula was the man who had given her a future. Two acts of kindness that had seemed separate were suddenly one unbroken thread. "It's you," she whispered, eyes wide. James's face softened. He could read the storm of emotion in her eyes, shock, confusion, gratitude. "Let's step outside," he suggested gently. "It's quieter there." They walked into the courtyard. The night was cool. The noise of the event faded. For a while, neither spoke. "I don't understand." Eleanor's voice shook. Why did you do all of this?" James leaned against the brick, hands in pockets, looked up at the stars, then back at her. "This began long before we were born. My grandfather was Corporal Thomas Caldwell. He served with your great-grandfather, Sergeant Michael Vance." And James told the story, the brutal battle, the moment Michael Vance saved the platoon, the fact that his own grandfather survived because of that courage. "My grandfather never forgot that day," James said, voice low and unsteady. "He carried a debt he could never repay. He taught me we honor those who came before us by continuing their legacy. The night at the supermarket, I had no idea who you were. I only saw a mother who needed help. When I learned you were Sergeant Vance's great-granddaughter, I knew this wasn't chance. It was a chance for my family to repay a 70-year-old debt." Eleanor stood silent, the story washing away shame and burden. This wasn't charity. It was something sacred, a thread stitched with blood and memory courage, echoing through generations until it reached her. "I grew up with stories of him," she whispered, tears bright. "To me, he was a photo on a shelf, a distant legend. You've made him feel alive." "Thank you," James smiled gently. "No, Eleanor. You're the one building a legacy. You're turning a chance into a future for Daisy. That's the highest honor you can give your great-grandfather." A comfortable quiet settled. For the first time, Eleanor didn't see James as a powerful billionaire. He was a grandson trying to guard his family's honor. And James no longer saw a recipient but the great-granddaughter of Michael Vance, a strong woman with fire in her eyes. Just then, a sharp voice cut the calm. "James, there you are. I've been looking everywhere." A tall, elegant woman stepped through the doorway. Immaculate suit, perfect hair, dazzling smile, eyes cool and calculating. Penelope James said politely, "Just getting some air. This is Eleanor Vance." He turned to Eleanor. "She's on the board." Penelope's gaze swept Eleanor plain dress, worn shoes. "Vance," she drawled, then smiled thinly. "Ah, the recipient. Wonderful." The word recipient dropped lightly, sticky with disdain. "Pleasure to meet you." Eleanor offered a hand, but Penelope ignored it and turned to James. "They're starting the speeches, and you promised to sit at my table." She looped her arm through his, a territorial move. James looked momentarily awkward, then gently freed himself. "I'll be right in, Penelope. I need to finish this conversation with Eleanor." The smile on Penelope's lips tightened. Her eyes flicked to Eleanor with a silent warning. Then she swept back inside. The warmth thinned. "I'm sorry," James said quietly, apologetic. "It's okay," Eleanor answered, though her chest felt heavy. "I should go in. I'm supposed to speak." The thought tightened her stomach again. "You'll do wonderfully," James said, steady and sure. "Just speak from your heart. That's enough." He was right. Minutes later, behind a small wooden podium, Eleanor drew a long breath. The speech she'd agonized over all week vanished. The polished phrases fell away. Only an unvarnished truth burned in her chest. So she spoke not as a beneficiary, but as a mother. She told of the suffocating weight of raising a child alone, of the shame in a supermarket, of the impossible choice between a baby's meal and an empty wallet. She spoke of her great-grandfather not as a distant statue, but as a torch she tried to follow even in her darkest nights. "This grant," Eleanor said, lifting her eyes to find James in the front row, "isn't just money. It's a message that we are seen. It affirms that the sacrifices of our fathers and grandfathers have not been forgotten. Legacy isn't only monuments in a park or names carved in stone. It lives in the opportunities we create for their children and grandchildren." She ended simply, "Thank you for giving my daughter a future, and thank you for giving me back hope." She stepped away. The room held its breath for a heartbeat, then swelled with applause. Elder veterans wiped their eyes. As Eleanor made her way back, leg-shaking hands reached to shake hers, to pat her shoulder, to whisper thanks. For the first time, she didn't feel like an outsider. She belonged. James, weighted eyes bright with an emotion hard to name, something like pride. He leaned close and murmured so only she could hear, "Told you you were wonderful." Across the room, Penelope Covington watched, lips pressed thin. She saw the way James looked at Eleanor with warmth and respect he had never offered her. She saw the genuine regard Eleanor received from the community. In Penelope's world, where power and money were the only measures, Eleanor was a disruptor. And Penelope would not leave that unchallenged. In the weeks that followed, a quiet campaign began. Penelope seeded doubts. In a budget meeting, she sighed, "I'm just concerned about oversight for this new grant. Significant funds given to a single individual based on a personal recommendation." In hallway whispers, "The story is touching, yes, but we must be cautious. What if people think the fund is being exploited for a private relationship?" The subtext was plain: Eleanor wasn't deserving. She was simply a friend of James Caldwell. Or worse, someone manipulating a lonely billionaire. Rumor spread, cruel, dangerous. Miss Gable defended Eleanor, but Penelope's power was strong. At last, she had to call a board meeting to review the program. The day before, she phoned Eleanor, voice heavy. "I'm sorry, Eleanor. Penelope is trying to suspend the program. I'm afraid she might succeed." Ice ran down Eleanor's spine. Everything she had been building seemed ready to collapse. The shame of baseless accusations hit like a hammer. Then another fire ignited, hotter than fear-anger. This wasn't just personal. It defamed Sergeant Michael Vance. It threatened to erase a program that could help dozens of families. The Eleanor of months past might have folded. Not now. She had found her voice. "When is the meeting?" she asked, firm. The next day, Eleanor walked into the boardroom. Heads turned. Penelope at the head of the table faltered for a heartbeat at Eleanor's presence. James sat at the far end, grim but resolute. Penelope began smooth professional speaking of fiduciary duty donor reputation transparency. She never said Eleanor's name, but everyone understood. My recommendation, she concluded, eyes sweeping the room with practiced concern, is to pause this program pending the formation of a more rigorous independent review committee, just to ensure transparency. A heavy hush fell. Board members avoided one another's eyes, wary of crossing Penelope. Before anyone could speak, Eleanor stood. "My name is Eleanor Vance," she said, clear and steady. "I am the individual and the personal acquaintance you're referring to." She turned to Penelope. "You talk about process and governance, but the truth is you want to punish me because you think I'm not worthy. You see a poor single mother who doesn't belong in your world. You see a charity case, not a person, not a great-granddaughter trying to live up to a hero's legacy." She faced the room. "This grant isn't just for me. It's for every family that has sacrificed, for every child whose parent or grandparent served this country. This isn't a privilege. It's a promise that their sacrifices won't be forgotten. To suspend it, to bury it under committees and paperwork, just because one person dislikes the first recipient, would be an insult to every family who served." Penelope gave a brittle laugh. "Very moving, Miss Vance. But feelings don't change facts. The fact is, you had a prior personal connection to the primary donor. At best, that's inappropriate optics." "You're right," said a deep voice from the end of the table. James stood. All eyes turned. "Our families do have a prior connection. It began more than 70 years ago." He walked to the head of the table and laid a worn leather journal on the polished wood. He opened to a marked page and read, "This is my grandfather's diary, Corporal Thomas Caldwell." Here he wrote about the day his life was saved by a soldier, Sergeant Michael Vance. He wrote, "He was the bravest man I ever knew. I owe him my life a debt I can never repay." James placed photos and documents beside it, a faded black and white of Michael Vance and Thomas Caldwell side by side, a military citation honoring valor. The Vance legacy, grant, James said, voice-ringing, isn't charity. It's a late payment on a debt of honor from the Caldwell family to the Vance family. Eleanor Vance is not an object of pity. She is the heir to a courageous legacy my family is duty-bound to honor. To suggest otherwise is to insult the memory of these two men." Silence fell. Penelope's face blanched. The story she had crafted crumpled in minutes, crushed by truth and honor. The vote was unanimous. Not only would the program continue, it would expand in partnership with the Caldwell Foundation, becoming a pillar of the center. A week later, Penelope Covington quietly resigned. 2 years passed. The world kept turning, but Eleanor's life was transformed. She graduated with honors in business administration. True to his word, James invited her to work at the family foundation, entrusting her to grow the very program she had first received. The Vance Legacy Grant now supported dozens of veteran families, carrying hope into new beginnings. On a sunny Saturday, Eleanor and James sat on a big picnic blanket in the park. Ahead, 7-year-old Sophia and 3-year-old Daisy chased each other, laughter floating like music, looking for all the world like sisters. Eleanor rested her head on James's shoulder, a familiar gesture. Their bond hadn't been built on grand displays, but on respect, kinship, and a quiet, steady love. James had become her partner, her rock, her real family. "You know," Eleanor said softly, watching Daisy chase a butterfly, "I still think about that woman in the supermarket, a woman afraid and lost." James drew her closer. "I remember too," he whispered. "And I think about the man I was then, a man so lonely, he'd forgotten what real connection felt like." He looked from the girls' shining faces to Eleanor's calm one. "You didn't just rebuild your life, Eleanor. You helped rebuild mine. You reminded me legacy isn't the money we leave behind. It's the lives we touch." Eleanor turned with a gentle smile, the kind of smile made of patient, enduring love. Their road had been hard, but under warm sunlight, wrapped in the simple joy of a small family, she knew they had arrived where they belonged. It all began with a small kindness at a checkout line. A moment proving that a debt of honor never loses its worth, and that quiet acts of love can echo across generations. A simple can of formula became the hinge that turned two lives. It showed that across the great divide between wealth and want, what truly defines us is not money, but compassion and understanding. While Eleanor bowed her head in shame, believing she was a failed mother, James Caldwell, a man used to power and numbers, chose to stop to see to listen. Two worlds that should never have crossed, touched because of a single kind act. Sometimes strength isn't in how much you own, but in whether you reach out at the right moment to the right person. And that moment can kindle hope not only for someone else, but for your own soul. If you were Eleanor facing prying eyes and an empty wallet, what would you do? And if you were James, able to change someone's day, would you stop? Share your thoughts in the comments. What does this story teach you about compassion and the true measure of a person? Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so we can spread more stories that inspire.